Federalist 43, Part 5. Madison looks at the fourth category of powers given to the federal government. In this paper, he divides it into 9 clauses. These are the things that he's going to cover in this paper. But just he divides the important ones into 9 clauses, 9 parts, and we were in the middle of clause 6 where I had to stop. So I'm going to go to the middle of clause 6 and start with the paragraph that starts like this. At first view, it might seem not to square with the Republican theory to suppose either that a majority have not the right or that a minority will have the force to subvert a government, and consequently that the federal interposition can never be required but when it would be improper. But theoretic reasoning in this, as in most other cases, must be qualified by the lessons of praxis. So he's still talking about how the federal government is going to guarantee a Republican form of government to every state. And he's going through different scenarios that the Republican government in a state might be replaced by a non-Republican one. So federal government, in case it's needed, will interpose, will get in the middle of it and stop this thing from happening. So he says, look at lessons of history. Sometimes you don't have to have a majority of people, 51% of people, necessarily ruining things for everybody else. Sometimes a minority can do that too. So let's read along and see what else he's got to say. At first view, it might seem not to square with the Republican theory to suppose either that a majority have not the right or that a minority will have the force to subvert a government, and consequently that the federal interposition can never be required but when it would be improper. But theoretic reasoning in this, as in most other cases, must be qualified by the lessons of practice. Why may not illicit combinations for purposes of violence be formed as well by a majority of the state, especially small state, as by a majority of a county or a district of the same state? And if the authority of the state ought in the latter case to protect the local magistracy, ought not the federal authority in the former to support the state authority? Besides, there are certain parts of the state constitutions which are so interwoven with the federal constitution that a violent blow cannot be given to one without communicating the wound to the other. Insurrections in a state will rarely induce a federal interposition unless the number concerned in them bear some proportion to the friends of the government. It will be much better that the violence in such cases should be repressed by the superintending power than that the majority should be left to maintain their cause by a bloody and obstinate contest. The existence of a right to interpose will generally prevent the necessity of exerting it. Is it true that force and right are necessarily on the same side in Republican government? May not the minor party possess such a superiority of pecuniary resources, of military talents and experience, or of secret succors for foreign powers, as will render it superior also in an appeal to the sword? So remember, sometimes you don't need to be a majority to force yourself into power or to destroy a Republican form of government. Sometimes a minority, if they have plenty of money, if within their groups they're talented in military ways, and also they have the backing of some foreign power, they can destroy a republican form of government different ways. So he says we have to be alert to this. We have to be smart. Now he'll continue, may not a more compact and advantageous position turn the scale on the same side against a superior number so situated as to be less capable of prompt and collected exertion of its strength. Nothing can be more chimerical than to imagine that in a trial of actual force, victory may be calculated by the rules which prevail in a census of the inhabitants, or which determine the event of the election. So he says sometimes you just cannot look at the numbers and think, well, this part has 51%, so they're going to definitely be able to stand to the 49%. But as he said, sometimes that 49% might have more money, might be more trained and armed, might have the backing of a foreign government to tip the balance. So don't be fooled by that. And then it says, may it not happen in fine that the minority of citizens may become a majority of persons by the accession of alien residents, of a casual concourse of adventurers, or of those whom the Constitution of the state has not admitted to the rights of suffrage. Another thing that might happen, maybe that 49% will promise to the people that are not citizens yet, hey, if you come and fight on our side, be on our side, we'll give you citizenship immediately, or we'll give you citizenship as soon as we come to power, so you don't have to wait another 2, 3, 4 more years. So he says, always consider these things. And then in the next long line, he brings up something else. I take no notice of unhappy species of population abounding in some of the states, who during the calm of regular government are sunk below the level of men, but who in the tempestuous scenes of civil violence may emerge into the human character and give a superiority of strength to any party with which they may associate themselves. Here, sadly, he uses a sentence that's just kind of not right. But again, I'm going to stick to reading of this and not giving my take on it. Here he says, he doesn't use the word enslaved people, but he says we know that in some of the states, especially southern states, the number of enslaved people is more than the number of enslaved people. So he says, we've seen what's happened in the Caribbean because revolutions were going to happen or were happening. Some of these enslaved people were rising up and throwing their masters out of power. And he says, in times of violence, in times that we cannot count on things to be normal, the same people that we are not treating like human beings, we're treating them as subhuman beings, might all of a sudden find their voice and rise up and just like human beings fight on the side that's going to guarantee them more freedom. So he says you got to be careful, because if that minority finds that they can promise something to the enslaved people, promise their freedom, promise whatever, they can have that force in their hands and suppress the majority. Again, Madison is being very realistic about what might happen. The next paragraph, in cases where it may be doubtful on which side justice lies, what better umpires could be desired by two violent factions, flying to arms and tearing states to pieces, than the representatives of Confederate states not heated by the local flame. So you want a partial judge, an impartial judge that is not inflamed by passions like the two states that are almost at war with each other. You want the federal government to oversee things and not let things get out of hand. To the impartiality of judges, they would unite the affection of friends. Happy would it be if such a remedy for its infirmities could be enjoined by all free governments, if a project equally effectual could be established for the universal peace of mind. Universal peace of mankind. See, again, he is reminding the audience, the readers, that we're trying to establish a system that is going to be modeled for the rest of the world. Now, remember, I just said something about slavery, and you might think, Husheng, how can you say these Americans are thinking about setting up a model for the rest of the world? I'm thinking in terms of what, unfortunately, the majority were thinking back then, 2 centuries ago, 230 years ago. So we have to be realistic about it. We think of it as the institution of slavery as being very ugly, which was. But like I said in an earlier Federalist, they were hoping that this institution of slavery will eventually become extinct, will go away. I said it in an earlier Federalist, that was their wish. Actually, Madison himself, in a beautiful paragraph, explains it. So we'll continue in the next video.